Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to write a formula for the input of a function. Does anybody remember anything about input? It is the x values, yes. The input is the x values. What would the y values be called?
Output.
The output. And that is somewhere later in our directions. The input is the x value. The output is the y. When you look at the first equation, it says let f of x equals 2x plus 3. We see the input is the x. Well, where's the y? The f of x itself is the fancy way of writing y, right? F of x is y. So when we do step A, and we solve y equals f of x for x, when we do the first thing that, I can't talk. The first thing that we want to do is we want to change f of x and we want to make it y. So I'm going to rewrite the equation. Y equals 2x plus 3. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. Then after that, it says to solve this equation for x. So how do I get x by itself? We subtract 3. So we have y minus 3 equals 2x. And we divide both sides by 2. You divide everything by 2. When I'm asked to solve for x, when I give the answer, I write x equals. When I'm asked to solve for x, then I'm going to write my answer as x equals y minus 3 over 2. I'm not going to write y minus 3 over 2 first. I'm going to write what I would ask to solve for first. Question? So that is step A. We're going to take the equation and we're going to solve it for x. Step B says find the input. So we're going to find the x when the output, when the y is negative 7. We're going to plug in negative 7 for y. So we're going to do negative 7, take away 3, divide that by 2. So for your answer for part A is x equals y minus 3 over 2. And then part B, x equals negative 5. So what is the first step? Make f of x into y. Then solve for x. Go ahead and look at number 1 in the student practice. Can you do part A? Can you solve for x?
I don't have eyes.
So my first step is make f of x just y equals x minus 2. Then what do we do next? Add 2. When I write my answer, I write x equals first. And then after that, we're going to do the B part. We're going to plug in 2 for which variable? What's the output? Y. So we're going to do 2 plus 2, so x is. All right, the second one. What do we do first? Jeremiah, what's the very first thing that we do for the second question? What's the very first thing? Change it to y. Thank you. Change it to y. Julie, what do I do next? Divide by 2. Is that what you're going to say, or review the question?
Yeah, kind of.
Oh, but when you solve, you do
Reverse.
the inverse operations.
Really
Yeah.
Yes.
The order of operations are for simplifying and evaluating. You always solve by doing the inverse
Outside in. You don't.
of the operation.
How would you start on the inside?
well, she's the one who taught me.
Who?
Who?
Who's the one that taught you?
I don't know.
The what? I hope it wasn't me that taught you PEMDAS. I hope you learned it way before that. So we got 1/2 equals x squared. Then, what do we do?
Square root
Uh-huh.
plus
Plus or minus.
minus.
If we do square root, you gotta do plus or minus. Remember that rule.
Yeah, that's. Who follows that rule?
People who want the right answer.
Well, I mean, I have half of the right answer and I didn't do that.
Okay.
That's one.
So 50% is a passing grade. Oh, it's not. Okay,
It's
so
only for like
x
half this
equals
quarter, like.
plus minus square root y over 2. Technically, if I said simplify, this is not in simplest form.
Yes.
So why not? So you have a radical 2 in the denominator.
Yeah,
We're not
that's one.
going to rationalize. We're just going to go with it today because that's not really our goal for today. So we're just going to leave that. That is our first answer. Then part B, let's put in 2 for the output. So we'll get x equals plus or minus square root 2 over 2.
Oh, no.
So we get x equals plus or minus 1. That's 2 answers.
Squiggly.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm going to stop talking for a moment while you try the third one, and then I will, of course, go over it.
Oh, you give us the hardest one.
Where is where you solve for x?
Alright.
Okay, so that part is part of your answers, so you have that. That's actually the more important part. Trevor, what's the first thing that we do? No, what's the first thing that we do, Courtney?
no, why?
Okay. Sorry, Courtney. He jumped in.
The other first thing.
I wrote
The other first thing, y equals.
I wrote that down.
Random.
Okay, after that, then we'll subtract our 3.
Don't leave the plus minus because it's also negative.
And just one.
Okay, when we have a negative and we have a cubed, and we are undoing both of them, which one do we have to undo first? The negative sign, because you have to do inverse order of operations. You have to do backwards, opposite. So, how do I cancel out a -1? Two choices.
Flip the signs.
You could either multiply by -1, or you could divide by -1. It is totally up to you. Because they give you the same answer either way. -1 is special, it gives you the same answer either way. So I get -y plus 3 equals x cubed. Or if you want, you could write it as 3 minus y. If you like that better. That I prefer that better, but it's up to you. Do you know what I just said?
Yeah, you flipped
No, I didn't flip it.
it. Yeah, you did. You know what I mean, Chris.
I know what you mean, but I'm giving your your vocabulary a hard time. It is a commutative property.
Yeah.
So how do I get rid of the cubed? Kenzie?
How does the
Cube root both sides.
is
Perfect.
property help us?
And do I need plus minus if I'm doing cube root?
No.
No, because it's odd, we do not need plus minus. So we have x equals the cube root of 3 minus y. So that would be our first part. Then we plug in 2 for our second part. and get x equals 1.
X equals 5.
All right, does anyone have any questions on how to do this? We just did 4 examples of it. This is
No,
like
ma'am.
half your homework is that right there.
Is it multiple choice?
So this is not multiple choice. Actually, today and tomorrow, the assignment is in the book.
Okay.
This stuff that we're doing, I keep using the word inverse operations. And I'm not trying to be fancy. That's like what it's really called.
Operations.
Inverse
Oh.
operations. So we have things that are called inverse functions.
You mean reverse?
No, I don't.
Reverse.
If you looked at the first example, where we had y equals 2x plus 3, and then we had x equals y minus 3 over 2, you will notice that, that in both of these, there's a 2.
Ellen.
No, I got it. You showed me remember. Both of these, there is a 2. In the first one, the 2 is being what?
Multiply.
In the second one, the 2 is being, and those are inverse operations. The 3 in the first one is added. What's happening to the 3 in the second one?
Subtraction.
Right. Now, when you think about, if I plugged a number in for x, if I put a number in there, let's say 7. Because that's my favorite. If I put in 7, what would I do first to find the answer?
Multiply.
I multiply by 2, then I'd add 3. If I put in 7 into this one,
You subtract 3 first. then
I would subtract 3, then divide by 2. So even the order is switched of the 2 and the 3. These are inverse operations. What you're also going to notice is that the roles of x and y are completely switched. Like we did all the stuff to the x in the first one, and the second one we did it to the y. Like the roles are completely switched. These are called inverse functions. The domain and the range, those are also completely switched. So if you flip the paper to the back of the front page, that is going to be more, I think is more explanatory. And it has color.
I ain't really picking up what you put down.
You're going to. It's really easy.
Oh.
So if we look at the original question, f of x equals 2x plus 3, and we make a table of values that go into that. If we plug in -2, that's our input, we get out 1. We plug in -1, we get out 0. We plug in 0, we get out 3, and so on. If we take the inverse function, what we had solved, how we switched everything around, we've solved it. Now when we plug in -1, we get out -2. Now when we plug in 1, we get out -1. When we plug in 3, we get out 0. Look at the original function and the inverse function. Tell me something you notice about the original function and the inverse function. What do you notice?
X and Y are just split brackets.
Right, and I'm not using flipped because that, to me, sounds like you're going upside down. Flip. So I'm not using that word, but I'm going to say like they're interchanged, they switch.
Yeah.
The x and y, they
The
switch.
Nintendo Switch.
If
Yeah.
the functions are inverses, all the ordered pairs switch. All the x's and y's switch.
Yeah.
When you graph them, this always happens. When you graph them, they will always reflect each other over the y equals x line. And the y equals x line is like 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, yeah. So they always reflect over that line. You can see this point right here, that point is 3, 0. And then this point right here is 0, 3. So the line of reflection is the y equals x line. And we're going to be graphically showing all of them. Yes.
Are you recording?
Yeah, you're kind of being disrespectful.
Because they asked.
Okay. So we're going to find the inverse. We're also going to graph the original and the inverse and the y equals x line. Let's just start by graphing the y equals x line. This, I would suggest, is pencil. What you're about to put on your paper, I'd suggest this is the pencil. Y equals X line. That is where 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3, 4 and 4, 5 and 5, and 6 and 6. It's also -1, -1, -2, -2, -3, -3.
Do we dash it or?
I'm just dashing it. It's just a reference to see that the two graphs reflect over this line. You have a straight edge, if you'd like to use that. If you just dot it while you're plotting those points, that's fine too. Now we're going to graph the original function, and then we're going to find its inverse and graph the inverse too. So today we're only doing lines. These are all lines today. So all of them should be in the form of y equals mx plus b. Now we did graph lines back in like chapter 1 or 2 or 1. Maybe so. So this is a review. And then when you go on to your next course, you're going to graph lines again. And then if you go to calculus, you'll graph lines again. It's not like something that you want to just learn for right now and then forget about. So what's m stand for?
Slope.
Okay, slope
Line intercept.
is 3, and that is rise over run, so you have to put it over something.
1. Run 1.
And then b is the y-intercept,
Yes.
which in this case is -1. And what is x for the y-intercept? Always 0. So when we plot these, we begin at -1. We begin at the y-intercept at 0, -1. We begin there, and then we move. From that point, we move up 3, right 1, up 3, right 1, up 3, right 1. If you run out of space, you can go down 3, but then you have to go left. This is where I'm going to use a color to connect it. This is where I'm using one of my colors. If you're using a highlighter, you can just highlight over the line that you have. I really don't use my color until I plotted the planes just to make sure they're right. And then I have arrows at the end of my line because it goes on forever. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to find the inverse. And I'm going to write steps. If you choose to not write those down, I don't know how you're going to find it. Maybe you can go read the book. So I'm going to write steps. I would suggest you write the steps with me too. First thing that you're going to do when you find the inverse is you're going to take the original question and you're going to make f of x equal y. That's the first thing we're going to do. Same thing we just did on the first page. So the original question, y equals 3x minus 1. That's my first step. Second thing is, I'm going to switch the variables x and y. I'm going to switch where they're located. X and y, I'm going to switch them. So I just rewrote the equation, but I switched x and y. So I now have x equals 3y minus 1. So I just switched x and y. Then I'm going to solve for the new y equals. I'm going to solve that new function for y equals. So what am I going to do first?
Plus 1.
Add 1 to we get x plus 1 equals 3y. Then I'm going to
Divide by 3.
divide by 3. So I'll have,
X plus 1.
I was skipping ahead. X plus 1 over 3 is y.
Wow.
Okay, after that, we're going to rename y into function form.
So F plus 1.
It's like f of x, but we're not going to call it f of x because there's already an f of x. So we're going to call it g of x. Okay? So I'm just going to take this equation and instead of y, I'm going to make it g of x. I'm also writing it first. And that should be the inverse function. So we wrote it as y equals, then we switched x and y, solved the equation, and then we made y into g of x, and we're done. So that's the equation we have to graph. You have two ways you could graph it. You could find your m and your b, and you could graph it that way. So you could find your m and your b, and you could graph it that way. Yes?
What is B 1/3 plus X plus 3, so it would just be
No, because the one's still being divided by 3.
Yeah, when we have this whole side divided by 3, you're going to divide each piece.
okay.
But I'm not going to graph it that way.
Yeah,
I'm saying you can graph it that way.
Okay.
But another way that you could graph it is if from the past notes right up here, what do we know about the ordered pairs?
they're switched.
There's inverses of each other. They're switched. So if I know the ordered pairs from this one, I can just switch them to graph the new one. Can anybody give me any ordered pair you see on here?
The answer will be
The blue one.
-3, -10.
Okay, 1, 2 is an ordered pair right there. That's 1, 2. So if I were going to graph the inverse, I would graph 2, 1. 2, 1.
-3, -10.
-3, -10 is way down here. So if I'm going to graph the inverse, I would graph -10, -3. Give me one more.
0, -1.
0, -1, that's on the original one. 0, -1. So if I were going to do the inverse, I switch them and I graph -1, 0. And once you have a few points, you can just use your straight edge to connect them. You just have to make sure that it looks like they reflect over the y equals x line.
Yeah. This is where you color.
Oh yeah, that was my second color. Sorry, that's the blue and the red. I mean, you can do it in pencil and then color it over if you want. This is how we can tell the difference between our inverse and our original. So we're going to work through the next 3, and the first thing I want you to do is graph that y equals x line. Go take a moment, graph that y equals x line. You should have a straight edge, so I should not keep wonky lines.
I'll give you.
Straight line.
You said the one.
You are sophomores and juniors, seniors, you can draw straight lines. Alex. Alex is counting down to the day he can say,
Oh my
see ya.
I just really want to get mine.
Me too.
Good enough.
I hope you don't have to off that. But that's one less final I have to grade.
Ulterior motive for you.
Yeah.
Hey, that's unsolved.
Jared, graph those 3 y equals x lines.
Chill. I already got one. Didn't know you
Graph
wanted
all
to do
3.
that.
Easy.
Alright, I got 3.
Okay, so what are we gonna do? We're gonna first graph the original function. If you're working ahead of me because you get this and I'm going slow, please work ahead of me. Please do it.
Gotcha.
We're gonna graph y equals 2x. Whoop. I don't even have it written as y equals 2x. But. So my slope is 2. That's the same thing as 2 over 1. And then what's my y-intercept?
0, 0.
Right, there isn't one, so it's 0. I mean, there is one, it's at 0. I'm saying it wrong. There is one, it's at 0. So from 0, 0, we go up 2 over 1.
How'd you got it?
You could also go down to left. Use your straight edge. Then after you graph the first one, then we're going to find our inverse. We're going to have to what are we going to have to do first?
No, that's
Y equals 2x. What are we going to have to do next?
Oh, split the block.
You have to switch the x and y. So we have x equals 2y.
Divided by 2.
And then we're going to solve for y. So you're going to divide it by 2. And I'm going to get x divided by 2. Now, you can divide by 2, but instead of dividing by a number, you can also multiply by what?
The reciprocal.
Reciprocal. So we could divide by 2, or you could multiply by what number?
Go to.
What's the reciprocal of 2?
Half.
So you can either divide by 2 or you can multiply by half. And you'll see that my two answers, I could either get x over 2 or I could get y equals half x. And then we need to write it as g of x. And the reason why I'm choosing to do it as the second one is I just think it would be easier to graph.
He's already got that.
Rise over round.
Okay, so when you graph the inverse, you can either take the original and switch the x and y, or you can do m and b from the inverse function, and that's totally up to you. So this one, I'm going to graph by using m and b, because this looks pretty easy. My m is a half, and my b is 0. So I start at 0, and I go up 1 over 2. So you can graph the function by doing y equals m versus b and finding m and b, or you can graph it by finding ordered pairs and switching them. Your choice. Go ahead and get number 2 or number 5 graphed. The original function for number 5 graphed. If you haven't done that yet.
Why not?
What's the equation for the second one? Did you switch ordered pairs?
Huh?
Like how did you get these points for the second one?
You know, I line is guessing.
Can you graph number 5? Okay, so do number 5. Okay, so the order recommended is that you graph the function given, then go find the inverse and graph that one. But I see a lot of you finding the inverse first, which is fine. I'm trying to look at your paper and see that you know how to graph a line. To find the inverse? Did you what? Right. The slope is negative 1. For the original? Is that what you're talking about? The original? That's what it looks like you're doing here.
That's true, guys.
All right, so I'm going to graph my original. So I need to find my slope and my y-intercept. I'm going to begin at 1, and I'm going to use my slope, which is -1, but -1 is always over something.
When?
1, right? -1 is over 1. So down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1. Now I'm drawing all these points. You do not need all these points. I'm kind of overkilling the points here. You can just do a few and then use your straight edge.
More the merrier.
So when we find our inverse, we first write y equals. Then we switch x and y. And then you solve for y. So I'm going to take away 1. And to cancel out negative, I multiply both sides by -1. And I'm going to change it to g of x, because we got to name it something different. Well, you can. You can write it as 1 minus x. That's totally fine. Put your phone away, unless you want to come up here because you know so much you want to teach the lesson. You can have your phone out because you're so bored because you know everything there is about inverses. What was your question? After what? As opposed to what? No, you can totally, that's what I'm saying. You can totally write it as 1 minus x. I'm just used to write it in that order because of mx plus b. But it doesn't matter. You can write it as this. Okay, so we go to graph our inverse. Your choices are take ordered pairs and switch them. Let's try that.
All of the above.
Give me an ordered pair on the original. 0, 1. That one right there. 0, 1. Now switch it. What do we get? We get 1, 0. And we graph it and it's right there. All right, give me a second ordered pair. -1, 2. It's right here. We switch it, we get 2, -1.
Oh, I see a pattern here.
Do you?
Oh, yeah.
What happens if I folded, you don't need to, but what happens if I folded along the dotted lines and I folded this line on top of itself?
It would be the same line.
it's gonna match up exactly because the inverse and the original question are exactly the same. Can you see that? The inverse and the original one, they're exactly the same.
That's why I got.
Yes. It's perpendicular to the reflection line.
My one smart math.
I don't think that's the one. I think there's more. So it would be the exact same line. All right, last one.
I already did it. You want me to teach the class?
So I'm going to find my slope of a third and my y-intercept at 0, -2. We're going to find our inverse. We're going to first write y equals. Then we're going to switch x and y. And you have to inverse your operations. So we're going to do what? We're going to add 2. We get x plus 2 equals 1/3 y. How do I cancel out 1/3 y? What's the reciprocal of 1/3? 3. So we'll multiply both sides by 3. And you have to distribute. So we'll get 3x plus 6 equals y. So g of x equals 3x plus 6. So for graphing it, you've got 2 choices. You can either graph 3x plus 6, make sure it makes sense, or you can take the order pairs and flip them, switch them. All right, I'm going to do this with m and b because these look like easy numbers to graph. My m is going to be 3/1. My b is going to be 6. 0, 6. So I'm going to begin at 6 and go up 3/1 or down 3 left. If you check any of the ordered pairs, they are inverses of each other. Other things you should notice is like if the line crosses the y equals x line, the other one's going to cross at the same place. If there is like an x-intercept, that's going to mean a y-intercept on the other one, and vice versa.
There's y-intercept, that means an x-intercept.
That's what I meant by vice versa. Okay, your assignment is in the book. Yep, that's all we're doing today. Because I want to see that you understand this and do it on your own. So the assignment is in the book, and I've copied the book. I also have 5 books over there. These copies are not for you to write on. They're for you to look at and do it on your own paper. The first 6 through 12, that's on your own paper. And then 13 to 20, that's the graphs. So you don't need the graph paper. I handed you out that graph paper. You don't need that till like starting at 13. No.
22.
No, 22 is on paper again. It's not graphing. There's only the 8 graphs. So I'll hand you this if you'd like to use it. If you want to take a picture of it and use your phone for it, that's fine. If you want to use the computer, the online book, I have the online book. So if you get home and you don't have your book, it's on Big Ideas also. Or you can use one of those books over there.
I want the paper.
I'm coming. I just gotta stop the recording.